This October, Australians will be asked to vote on a change to our Constitution to recognise Indigenous Australians in the Constitution and establish a body known as The Voice, which would allow Indigenous representatives to make representation to our Parliament. It is being fiercely debated, and the proposal is struggling in the polls.
The national vote is close. Yes is trailing, but undecided is significant.
So in a spirit of generosity and optimism, vote yes.
Do we divide our country along the lines of race within our nation's rule book?
But even though for Australians this is your decision to make, it has been influenced by foreign funds which have propped up activist fact-checking bodies. Australian journalism and political debates were censored on Facebook by this censorship machine.
It's now been censored by Facebook and criticised by both the ABC and RMIT's so-called fact check. I think the same things happened to discussions last week on this program about the full 26-page Uluru Statement, the statement that wants treaties and land reform and compensation as a percentage of GDP, all of that. This is what we've got to look forward to, I guess, as Australians, given this misinformation, disinformation game that's going on around The Voice, is what the Prime Minister now wants to lock into legislation if the Parliament is stupid enough to vote for it.
And as a result of this investigation, Meta has been forced to cut ties with prominent Australian university, RMIT, which has been pocketing up to $740,000 a year from the tech giant's Irish subsidiary. It is foreign-funded activism, and make no mistake, it has already impacted what you have been able to see on social media about the referendum.
Activists masquerading as fact-checkers, and people are having their access to legitimate stories suppressed by their actions.
This is, Rita, a giant mess, and I think the RMIT Fact Lab and potentially their fact check, because there's two separate departments here, their credibility is being ripped apart.
This investigation also exposes the unaccountable and lucrative Wild West fact-checking industry for failing to follow its own rules.
The censors say their goal is to restrict information that delegitimizes governmental, industrial, and news media organizations. That mandate is so sweeping that it could easily censor criticism from any part of the status quo, from elected officials to institutions to laws.
Tech giants have paid an opaque body known as the International Fact-Checking Network millions of dollars to police the industry. But this investigation has uncovered evidence that the rules are simply being ignored. These are the rules governments around the world have been promised by Meta are being followed to make the system impartial.
We've heard today a number of examples of where we may have made content review mistakes on conservative content, but I can assure you that there are a lot of folks who think that we make content moderation or content review mistakes of liberal content as well.
So, who are the people and the organisations profiting of political censorship? Melbourne University RMIT has a direct commercial relationship with Facebook, which has allowed it to access internal systems and downrank entire newsrooms, preventing you from seeing the content. The university used the powers Facebook has given it to throttle Sky News Australia's Facebook page with false fact checks multiple times this year, breaching the Meta-endorsed IFCN Code of Principles and preventing millions of Australians from reading or watching Sky News Australia's journalism. The operation is run by former ABC journalist Russell Skelton, who is unashamedly partisan on social media. He has published dozens of tweets criticising conservative politicians and the journalists he is supposed to fact-check. More recently, he campaigned directly for The Voice, resharing slogans and pro-yes vote imagery drafted by politicians seeking to change the Constitution. This is a breach of the rules set up by the International Fact-Checking Network, which require both organisations and staff act with impartiality. One of Skelton's fact-checkers, Renee Davidson, also labelled opposition leader Peter Dutton a fear-mongering racist. And of course, we have the people running the so-called International Fact-Checking Network, who are ignoring flagrant breaches of their own rules. Joining us to help investigate what has been dubbed the censorship industrial complex are experts on the matter, including one of the journalists behind the Twitter files, Australian senators furious with political censorship, and a woman who was deemed to be fake news by this foreign-funded system. Author and activist Michael Shellenberger played a pivotal role earlier this year in releasing the Twitter files, which exposed the power big tech companies have on controlling narratives. Shellenberger shared previously unseen information regarding Twitter's content moderation before Elon Musk took over Twitter, exposing the level of influence high-level executives and the intelligence service had on the platform.
The government no longer needs a predicate of calling you a terrorist or an extremist to deploy government resources to counter your political activity. The only predicate it needs is simply the assertion that the opinion you expressed on social media is wrong.
Michael Shellenberger, thank you for joining us. Now, you have done a lot of work that's led global conversations around what you've dubbed the censorship industrial complex. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why this work is important to you?
Well, sure. I mean, my interest in censorship really began when I was one of the Twitter files authors. We were given access to internal emails and messages within Twitter. And what we discovered was at first the kind of censorship that you would expect, very politically correct, very sort of radical left censorship. But then we started to discover something very strange, which is we started to see requests from the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, other sort of security and intelligence agencies asking for people to be censored. We found that very chilling and very strange, and that really was the beginning of starting to understand that there was a vast apparatus of government agencies around the world, not just in the United States, think tanks, some of them associated with universities, and other groups that were putting pressure on social media platforms to engage in outright censorship of people for just having different views, whether on COVID vaccines or on climate change or on various racial matters, sensitive issues that should be publicly debated, that our Constitution protects as free speech, really clear violations of the First Amendment. And we was shocking to see that the government was funding these organizations to the tune of tens of millions and maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's why we labeled it the censorship industrial complex, because it's quite big, quite powerful, and really until recently was hidden from the public.